April 21st, 1944, Portsmouth Naval Base, Southern England. The map table is covered in reconnaissance photographs, each one showing the same nightmare. Lieutenant Commander Nigel Clogstoun-Willmott leans over them, his finger tracing lines across the grainy images of the Normandy coastline. Outside, rain hammers against the Quonset hut's metal roof. Inside, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the kind of silence that comes when men realize they're staring at a problem that could kill thousands. The photographs show underwater obstacles. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, wooden ramps tipped with mines. The Germans have turned the approaches to the French beaches into a submerged maze of steel and explosives, all of it hidden beneath the waves at high tide. Each obstacle is positioned to rip the bottom out of a landing craft or detonate against its hull. The invasion planners wanted to land at high tide to minimize the time soldiers spend exposed on the beach, but high tide means these obstacles disappear completely underwater. Clogstoun-Willmott straightens up, his back aching from hours bent over the table. He's 34 years old, though the past 3 years of war have added lines around his eyes that make him look older. Around him, other officers shuffle through more photographs, more reports from the French resistance, more technical assessments. Someone mentions delayed timing. Someone else suggests landing at low tide instead. The debate circles back on itself. But changing the tide schedule isn't simple. The entire invasion plan, months in the making, is built around specific tidal conditions. Thousands of landing craft, hundreds of ships, the coordination of air support, the timing of paratrooper drops. Everything is synchronized to the minute. Moving the landing time means rebuilding the entire operation from scratch. And they don't have scratch. They have weeks, maybe a month at most, before the weather window closes. Admiral Bertram Ramsay, the naval commander for the invasion, has made the problem clear in his clipped, precise way. The landing craft need to get through. They need to get through in darkness before dawn, when German gunners can't see them clearly. And they need to avoid the obstacles without slowing down, because slowing down means bunching up, and bunching up means becoming easy targets once the sun rises. Clogstoun-Willmott walks to the window. Rain streams down the glass. Beyond it, Portsmouth Harbor is crowded with ships, more vessels than he's ever seen in one place. LSTs and LCAs, destroyers and transports, minesweepers and patrol boats, all of them waiting, all of them depending on someone figuring out how to get landing craft through a lethal obstacle course in pitch darkness without lights, without markers, without anything the Germans might spot and use to predict where the invasion will hit. The obstacles aren't random. Intelligence reports suggest the Germans have left narrow channels between the densest concentrations, lanes where their own patrol boats can navigate. These channels exist, but they're unmarked. They're invisible at high tide. And in the chaos of an amphibious assault, with thousands of craft approaching the shore simultaneously, finding these channels without guidance would be pure luck. Most boats won't make it. Most soldiers won't reach the beach. Someone brings in fresh tea. It goes cold on the table, untouched. The photographs stay spread across the map, a paper testimony to German engineering and French suffering. Somewhere across the channel in occupied France, those obstacles wait in the surf. The clock on the wall shows 11:30 p.m. In 6 weeks, give or take, those obstacles will meet the largest invasion force ever assembled, unless someone solves this problem. D-Day will become a massacre before the first soldier sets foot on sand. Clogstoun-Willmott turns back to the table. He's not an engineer. He's not an inventor. He's a naval officer who specializes in beach reconnaissance, in swimming ashore under enemy noses and measuring gradients, testing sand composition, photographing defenses. He knows coastlines and currents and how to stay alive in places where you're not supposed to be. But he also knows something else. He knows that sometimes the most important solutions don't come from laboratories or planning committees. Sometimes they come from someone willing to improvise with whatever's at hand, someone willing to work through the night with nothing but basic tools and a problem that absolutely must be solved. He picks up one of the photographs again, studying the spacing between obstacles, the pattern of their placement. His mind is already working, already turning over possibilities. Outside, the rain continues. Inside, the war waits for an answer. The answer, when it starts to form, comes from an unexpected place. Not from naval engineering or military innovation, but from Clogstoun-Willmott's childhood in a cluttered workshop in Hampshire, where his grandfather bent over tiny mechanisms with jeweler's tools and infinite patience. His grandfather had been a watchmaker, not the kind who simply replaced batteries or adjusted straps, but the old kind, the kind who understood that a watch is really just a problem of precision. How do you make something move accurately when it's smaller than your thumb? How do you ensure that gears mesh perfectly, that springs release their tension at exactly the right rate, that every component works in harmony despite being subject to temperature changes, moisture, jarring movements, the simple entropy of time itself? Young Nigel had spent countless afternoons in that workshop watching wrinkled hands manipulate components that seemed to disappear against fingertips. His grandfather would explain the logic of it, the way each piece served purpose, how understanding the whole system meant understanding how each tiny part contributed to the function. A watch doesn't work because of magic. It works because someone thought carefully about every detail. That training never left him. Even at the Royal Naval College, even during his early years as a junior officer, Clogstoun-Willmott carried that mindset. When something broke, he didn't just send it to be fixed. He opened it, studied it, understood why it failed. He kept a small toolkit in his quarters, the kind of precise instruments his grandfather would have recognized. Tweezers, small screwdrivers, magnifying glass, a few spare parts scavenged from broken equipment. His fellow officers sometimes joked about it, called him the tinker. But they also came to him when their compasses malfunctioned or their binoculars needed adjustment. He had steady hands and the patience to work on delicate mechanisms while a ship rolled beneath him. The war had taken him in a different direction. In 1942, he volunteered for Combined Operations Piloted Parties, the COP teams, small units of men who conducted reconnaissance of enemy beaches, swimming ashore at night to gather intelligence that would determine where and how amphibious landings could succeed. It was dangerous work, the kind where you spent hours in freezing water, where German sentries walked above you on the shore, where one mistake meant capture or death. He'd done it dozens of times. Normandy, Sicily, North Africa. Each mission the same basic pattern. Submarine surfaces offshore after dark. You and your partner slip into the water, wearing only swimming trunks and darkened with camouflage cream. You swim to shore, staying low, timing your approach between patrol sweeps. You measure beach gradients, test the sand's load-bearing capacity, photograph obstacles, note the positions of bunkers and gun emplacements. Then you swim back, get picked up, return to base and write reports that other men will use to decide if a beach is suitable for invasion. The work taught him to think in terms of practical solutions under impossible constraints. You couldn't bring elaborate equipment on these missions. You brought what you could carry while swimming. You improvised with what was available. You solved problems with ingenuity, not resources. Now, staring at these photographs of underwater obstacles, his mind makes connections. The problem isn't really the obstacles themselves. The Germans have placed them, and they're not moving. The problem is navigation. How do you guide thousands of boats through narrow channels in darkness when you can't use lights, can't use radio beacons, can't use anything visible or electronic that might alert the enemy? He thinks about his grandfather's workshop again, about precision in small spaces, about mechanisms that work reliably in harsh conditions, about the luminous paint on watch dials, the stuff that glows faintly in darkness so you can read the time without a light. An idea begins to form. Not complete yet, not fully developed, but the skeleton of something workable. The next morning, he requests a meeting with Admiral Ramsay's staff. He brings no elaborate presentation, no technical drawings, just a simple proposal. Let him go back to France. Let him make one more reconnaissance mission to the exact beaches where the invasion will land. Let him map the channels between the obstacles precisely. And then, if his idea works, let him mark those channels with something the landing craft crews can see in darkness, but the Germans can't spot from shore.
The staff officers are skeptical. They want details. What kind of markers? How will they stay in place? How will they survive the tide and weather? What if the Germans discover them? Clogstoun-Willmott doesn't have all the answers yet. What he has is the confidence of someone who's spent his life taking things apart and putting them back together, who swum onto enemy beaches and returned alive, who understands that the best solutions often come from combining simple components in clever ways. They give him permission, not because his idea is proven, but because they're running out of time and no one else has suggested anything better. He has one chance, one reconnaissance mission to map the channels, and then, based on what he finds, one attempt to create a marking system that might, possibly guide the invasion fleet through the darkness without getting everyone killed? He leaves the meeting and heads to his quarters, opens his toolkit, looks at the small, precise instruments inside. Somewhere in his mind, his grandfather's voice speaks about patience, about understanding how small pieces fit together to create something larger. Clogstoun-Willmott has 6 weeks to become an inventor. The submarine surfaces 3 miles off the Normandy coast at 11:45 p.m. on May 17, 1944. HMS X-20, a midget submarine, barely larger than a bus. Clogstoun-Willmott stands in the conning tower, tasting salt spray, watching the dark mass of the French coastline. No lights visible. The Germans maintain strict blackout protocols, just the sound of waves against the hull and the low rumble of the diesel engine. The sea is cold, always cold, even in May. He's wearing his swimming gear now, darkened with a mixture of cocoa and petroleum jelly that makes him nearly invisible in the water. Waterproof bags are secured to his body with rubber straps. Inside them, measuring tapes, a compass, notebooks wrapped in oilcloth, a small camera, plumb lines for testing depth. Everything he needs to map the obstacle field with precision. His partner for this mission is Lieutenant Wilson, a younger man who's done 3 beach reconnaissance operations. They don't talk much. There's not much to say that hasn't been said during the briefing. They both know the risks. German patrols walk the beaches every 20 minutes. Searchlights sweep the water irregularly. Machine gun positions are dug in every few hundred yards. If they're spotted, there's no rescue attempt. The submarine won't risk surfacing again. At midnight, they slip over the side. The cold hits immediately, stealing breath, making muscles clench. Clogstoun-Willmott forces himself to breathe slowly, steadily, waiting for his body to adjust. Beside him, Wilson does the same. Then they start swimming. A slow breaststroke that minimizes splashing keeps their heads low to the water. The submarine disappears behind them, sliding back beneath the surface. It takes 40 minutes to reach the obstacle line. Clogstoun-Willmott feels his hand brush against something solid underwater. He stops, treading water carefully, reaching down. Metal, cold, rough with rust and barnacles. A Belgian gate, exactly like the ones in the photographs. A massive steel frame, 10 feet tall, angled to catch landing craft and tear them open. He surfaces just enough to look around. More obstacles emerge from the darkness as his eyes adjust. Wooden posts topped with mines, steel tetrahedrons, log ramps. They stretch in both directions along the beach, a forest of death hidden just below the waterline. But there are gaps, channels between the densest concentrations. Just like the intelligence reports suggested, the Germans have left themselves routes for their patrol boats to navigate. These channels aren't wide, maybe 20 yards across in places, but they're there. Clogstoun-Willmott pulls out his waterproof compass, takes a bearing, starts measuring. He and Wilson work methodically, moving from obstacle to obstacle, noting positions, distances, depths. When a searchlight sweeps across the water, they duck under, holding their breath, waiting in the cold darkness until the light passes. When they hear voices from the beach, German sentries talking, they freeze, becoming nothing but floating debris in the surf. The work takes hours. By 3 a.m., they've mapped a section of beach about 400 yards wide. Clogstoun-Willmott's fingers are numb. His legs feel heavy, unresponsive. But he has what he needs. In his waterproof notebook, written in pencil on treated paper, are precise measurements of the obstacle field and the channels that run through it. More importantly, he understands the pattern now. The obstacles aren't randomly placed. They follow a logic, a German engineering mindset that values systematic coverage. The channels are consistent, spaced at predictable intervals. If you know where one channel is, you can estimate where the others are. If you can mark the entrance to a channel clearly enough for a landing craft coxswain to see it in darkness, you can guide entire waves of boats through safely. They start swimming back at 4:15 a.m. The submarine will surface at 5 a.m. sharp, 10 minutes only, then dive again regardless of whether they've made it back. Clogstoun-Willmott's arms burn with exhaustion. Each stroke feels harder than the last. Wilson stays close beside him, matching his pace. At 4:50 a.m., they're still a quarter mile from the rendezvous point. Clogstoun-Willmott can feel his body shutting down, the cold and exhaustion overwhelming his will to keep moving. He thinks about his grandfather's workshop, about patience, about finishing what you start. He keeps swimming. The submarine surfaces at exactly 5 a.m. Clogstoun-Willmott sees it, a dark shape against darker water. He finds reserves he didn't know he had, pulls himself through the final 100 yards. Hands reach down, grab him, haul him up onto the deck. Wilson comes up right behind him. They collapse on the metal plating, shivering violently, unable to speak. Below, someone wraps them in blankets. Someone else brings hot tea laced with rum. The submarine dives, dropping into the safety of deep water. They're alive. They have the measurements, they have the information that might possibly save the invasion. But information alone won't save anyone. Clogstoun-Willmott lies in the cramped crew quarters, wrapped in blankets, his body slowly warming. His mind is already working on the next problem. He knows where the channels are, he knows their width, their orientation, their depth. Now he needs to figure out how to mark them. Traditional naval buoys won't work. They're too large, too obvious. The Germans would spot them immediately and know exactly where the invasion is coming. Radio beacons are out for the same reason. Anything electronic can be detected. Anything that floats on the surface will be visible in daylight. The markers need to be small, nearly invisible to anyone not looking for them specifically. They need to be visible from a landing craft's perspective, close to the water, but not from the shore or from German patrol boats. They need to work in darkness without using bright lights, and they need to be deployed quickly, quietly, in the hours just before the invasion begins. Back at Portsmouth, 2 days later, Clogstoun-Willmott spreads his notes across the same map table where this all started. Other officers gather around, studying the measurements, asking questions about the channel's width and the spacing of obstacles. Someone asks the obvious question, how do we mark these channels? Clogstoun-Willmott reaches into his pocket and pulls out his grandfather's old pocket watch. He opens it, showing the face. In the dim light of the hut, the watch hands glow faintly green, coated with radium-based luminous paint. He says, like this. The officers stare at the watch. One of them, a commander named Davies, picks it up, holds it close to his face, studying the faint green glow. He looks skeptical. You want to mark invasion channels with watch paint? Not just paint, Clogstoun-Willmott says. He's thought this through on the submarine ride back, during the sleepless night after. Small buoys, weighted to float just below the surface at high tide, coated with luminous paint, visible from a landing craft sitting low in the water, but invisible from shore or from German patrol boats. Davy sets the watch down. How small? 6 inches across, maybe 8. Just large enough to catch enough light to glow, small enough that wave action won't move them significantly. Another officer, Captain Morton, shakes his head. Luminous paint needs to be charged by light. You're talking about deploying these in darkness. They won't glow. They will if we charge them beforehand. The paint holds luminescence for hours. We deploy them from small boats just before midnight. They'll glow until well after dawn, long enough to guide the first waves of boats through safely. And the Germans won't see them? Not from shore. Not unless they're looking straight down into the water from directly above. The glow is faint. You have to be close, at water level, to see it clearly. The room goes quiet. Officers exchange glances. It's an absurd idea, marking the greatest invasion in history with something borrowed from pocket watches. But it's also elegant.
The kind of solution that works precisely because it's so small scale that no one would think to look for it. Admiral Ramsay himself comes to inspect the proposal 2 days later. He listens to Clogstoun-Willmott's explanation, asks pointed questions about deployment timing, about how many markers would be needed, about what happens if currents move them. Then he gives approval. Not enthusiastic approval, but the practical kind that comes from a man who knows he's out of better options. You have one chance to test this, Ramsay says. Build your markers, deploy them somewhere offshore here in similar conditions. If they work, you can manufacture enough for the actual invasion. If they don't, we're back to hoping the coxswains have good luck and better instincts. Clogstoun-Willmott has 3 weeks. He starts with the most difficult part, finding the materials. Luminous paint is available, the same radium-based compound used for watch dials and instrument panels, but it's controlled, rationed, allocated to essential military equipment. He needs gallons of it. He spends 2 days navigating supply chains, calling in favors, explaining to skeptical quartermasters why the Navy needs enough luminous paint to coat several hundred small buoys. The buoys themselves are another problem. There's no time to have them manufactured properly, no time for engineering specifications or quality testing. He needs something now, something he can improvise with materials at hand. He finds his solution in a Portsmouth warehouse, buried under stacks of spare parts. Metal floats, originally designed for mine moorings, spherical, about 8 inches in diameter, made of copper that's already starting to corrode. They're obsolete, replaced by newer designs, forgotten in storage. Perfect. He requisitions 200 of them, has them brought to a workshop near the harbor. Then he starts working. The real work begins on June 1st at 8 p.m. Clogstoun-Willmott has assembled a small team. 3 naval artificers, men skilled in mechanical work, and 2 COPP team members who understand beach operations. They crowd into the workshop, looking at the pile of metal floats, the cans of luminous paint, the coils of wire and lead weights. Clogstoun-Willmott explains the design. Each buoy needs to be weighted precisely so it floats just below the surface at high tide. Too heavy, and it sinks out of sight. Too light, and it bobs on the surface where German observers might spot it. The weighting has to account for saltwater density, wave action, the specific tidal conditions on the Normandy coast. He's calculated the weight needed. Now he has to prove it works. They start with a single prototype. Clogstoun-Willmott works like his grandfather used to, methodically, testing each component. He attaches a lead weight to the bottom of a float with wire. Too heavy. He removes weight, tests again in a barrel of salt water, still too heavy. He adjusts, measures, tests. By 10:30 p.m., he has a float that sits exactly where he wants it, invisible from above, the top curve just catching the surface. Now the paint. He opens the first can carefully. The luminous paint is thick, greenish-white, with a faint chemical smell. He stirs it thoroughly, then starts applying it to the float's surface with a brush. Thin coats, multiple layers, building up coverage. The artificers watch, learning the technique, then start on their own floats. The work is tedious. Each float needs careful weighting, careful painting, careful inspection, and there are nearly 200 to complete. Clogstoun-Willmott realizes quickly that they won't finish in one night. They'll need to work in shifts, around the clock. By 2 a.m., they've completed 30 floats. Clogstoun-Willmott's hands are cramping from holding the brush, his eyes burning from focusing on detailed work under dim workshop lights. One of the artificers brings tea. They drink it standing, not wanting to waste time sitting. At 4 a.m., a problem emerges. Some of the floats aren't holding their luminescence evenly. The paint is too thin in spots, too thick in others. Clogstoun-Willmott examines them, realizes they need a base coat first, then the luminous layer, then a clear sealant to protect it from salt water. It's more complex than he thought, more time-consuming. He recalculates. With the new process, each float takes approximately 15 minutes to complete. 200 floats means 50 hours of work. He has his team working in shifts, but even so, it's tight. Very tight. They work through June 2nd, through the night of June 3rd. The workshop fills with completed floats, each one glowing faintly green in the darkness. Clogstoun-Willmott barely sleeps. He supervises, checks quality, fixes mistakes, keeps the work moving forward. On June 4th at 3 p.m., they finish the last float. Clogstoun-Willmott stands in the workshop surrounded by 200 glowing spheres arranged in careful rows. His team looks exhausted, faces pale, hands stained with paint. But they're done. Except they're not really done. The floats haven't been tested in actual conditions. They've been weighted and painted and sealed, but no one knows if they'll work when deployed in open water, in darkness, with waves and currents, and the chaos of an approaching invasion fleet. Admiral Ramsay has authorized a test for tonight. A section of coastline east of Portsmouth, similar tile conditions to Normandy. Clogstoun-Willmott will deploy a line of markers in darkness. Then, starting at 2 a.m., a series of landing craft will attempt to navigate through them, their coxswains briefed only to look for faint luminous markers at water level. If the coxswains can see the markers and follow them accurately, the system works. If they can't, the entire improvisation fails, and thousands of soldiers will approach Normandy beaches with no guidance except hope. The floats are loaded onto a motor launch at 9 p.m. Clogstoun-Willmott and 2 COPP team members board with them. The launch moves out into the channel, running without lights, navigating by compass and dead reckoning. The night is overcast, no moon, visibility almost zero. Good conditions for testing. These are the conditions they'll face on D-Day. At 11:30 p.m., they reach the deployment area. Clogstoun-Willmott has mapped out a pattern, a simulated channel entrance marked by floats at 50-yard intervals, curving slightly to mimic the channels he measured off Normandy. Each float has been charged under bright lights for an hour before loading, its luminous paint storing energy that will release as a faint glow in darkness. They begin deployment. Clogstoun-Willmott lifts the first float, checks its weight distribution one final time, then lowers it over the side. It sinks briefly, then stabilizes, floating just beneath the surface exactly as designed. In the darkness, he can barely see it himself, but when he leans over, looking down at water level, there it is, a faint green glow, subtle but unmistakable. They move to the next position, deploy another float, then another. The work takes an hour. By 12:30 p.m., all 20 markers for this test channel are in place. The launch returns to Portsmouth. Clogstoun-Willmott doesn't go back to his quarters. He stays at the harbor, drinking coffee that's gone cold, waiting. The landing craft are scheduled to begin their approach at 2 a.m. He checks his watch every few minutes, winding it unnecessarily, a nervous habit from childhood. At 1:45 p.m., he boards an observation vessel, a small patrol boat that will follow the landing craft at a distance. The vessel moves out into the darkness, takes up position a quarter mile from the marker line. At exactly 2 a.m., the first landing craft appears. It's running without lights, just a dark shape against darker water. Clogstoun-Willmott watches through binoculars, though in this darkness they're almost useless. He can hear the craft's engine, a low rumble, hear water slapping against its hull, but he can't see if the coxswain is spotting the markers. The landing craft slows, changes course slightly, then continues, adjusting its heading again after a few moments. It's following something, following the markers. Clogstoun-Willmott feels his chest tighten. It's working. The craft navigates through the entire marker line, adjusting course at each float, following the channel precisely. When it reaches the end, it circles back, signals with the shaded lamp. Success. The coxswain could see the markers clearly enough to navigate by them. 3 more landing craft follow. All of them navigate the channel successfully. One coxswain reports the markers were clear as day once he knew what to look for. Another says they were faint but sufficient. A third mentions he had to look carefully, but once he spotted the first marker, the rest were easy to follow. Back at Portsmouth, at 4:30 a.m., Clogstoun-Willmott writes his report. The system works. With proper deployment timing, with careful positioning based on his reconnaissance measurements, the luminous markers can guide landing craft through the obstacle fields in complete darkness. Admiral Ramsay reads the report at 7 a.m. He approves immediate production of additional markers. They'll need hundreds more for the actual invasion, enough to mark multiple channels across 5 beach sectors.
Clogstoun-Willmott has 4 days to manufacture them. The workshop becomes a production line. More artificers are brought in. More luminous paint is requisitioned. They work in shifts, 24 hours a day. Clogstoun-Willmott oversees everything, checking quality on each float, ensuring consistent weight distribution and paint application. His hands shake from exhaustion. His eyes are bloodshot. He doesn't stop. By June 5th, they have 400 floats completed. More than enough for the primary landing zones, with reserves in case some markers fail or drift out of position. That evening, word comes down, the invasion is on. D-Day is set for June 6th. Weather conditions are marginal but acceptable. The fleet will begin departing Portsmouth at midnight. Clogstoun-Willmott and his team load the markers onto small, fast boats, the kind used for harbor patrol. These boats will race ahead of the main invasion fleet, deploy the markers in the hours before dawn, then retreat before the bombardment begins. At 11 p.m. on June 5th, Clogstoun-Willmott stands on the Portsmouth dock, watching the invasion fleet assemble in the harbor. Ships everywhere, more than he can count, all of them preparing to cross the channel. Somewhere in that fleet are the landing craft that will depend on his markers to navigate safely through the obstacles. He thinks about his grandfather again, about precision in small things, about how a watch works because every component, no matter how tiny, does its job correctly, about how saving thousands of lives sometimes comes down to nothing more than a few dozen small floats coated with paint that glows in the dark. The fast boats depart at midnight. Clogstoun-Willmott is on the lead boat, carrying the markers for Omaha Beach, the most dangerous landing zone, the place where the obstacles are thickest, where the channels are narrowest, where any mistake in navigation will be catastrophic. They race across the channel, engines screaming, spray soaking everyone on deck. Behind them, the massive invasion fleet follows at a slower pace. Battleships and cruisers, transports and destroyers, thousands of landing craft filled with soldiers who don't yet know they're depending on a watchmaker's improvisation to survive the next few hours. They reach the Normandy coast at 3:15 a.m. The water is rougher here than during Clogstoun-Willmott's reconnaissance, waves running 3 to 4 feet, wind gusting from the northwest. The fast boat pitches and rolls. Spray breaks over the bow. In the darkness, the French coastline is invisible, just a sense of something solid beyond the water. Clogstoun-Willmott checks his compass bearings, compares them against the measurements from his reconnaissance notes. They're in the right position, about a half-mile offshore from Omaha Beach. This is where the channels begin, where the obstacle field starts its deadly naze beneath the waves. The other fast boats arrive within minutes, taking up positions along the invasion front. Each boat carries markers for a specific sector: Utah Beach, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. 5 landing zones, dozens of channels, all of them needing to be marked in the next 90 minutes before the first wave of landing craft arrives. At 3:30 a.m., they begin deployment. The process is faster than during the test runs, driven by urgency and practice repetition. Clogstoun-Willmott and his team move methodically, lowering markers over the side at precise intervals. Each marker has been charged under bright lights aboard the boat during the crossing. Now they glow faintly as they settle into position, small green stars beneath the black water. The Germans don't notice. Not yet.
Their searchlights sweep the water occasionally, but they're looking for boats, for surface threats. The markers are too small, too dim, positioned too low to catch attention. From shore, from the bunkers and gun positions, they're invisible. By 4:45 a.m., all markers are deployed. Clogstoun-Willmott's boat retreats to a position several miles offshore, well clear of the landing zones. Now there's nothing to do but wait and watch. The fleet is approaching. He can't see it yet, but he knows it's out there. Thousands of vessels converging on this coast. At 5:30 a.m., the bombardment begins. Battleships offshore open fire, their main guns sending shells screaming toward the French coast. The sound is overwhelming, a continuous thunder that seems to shake the air itself. Cruisers join in, then destroyers moving closer to shore. The entire coastline erupts in explosions, bright flashes lighting the darkness, smoke rising in massive columns. Clogstoun-Willmott watches through binoculars, trying to see if the bombardment has disturbed the markers. Possible to tell in this chaos. He has to trust that the weights are sufficient, that the floats will hold position despite the concussion of nearby shell impacts. At 6:15 a.m., the first landing craft appear. They come in waves, LCAs mostly, each one packed with 30 soldiers. The lead craft approach cautiously, coxswains scanning the water ahead. Dawn is just beginning to break, a gray light spreading across the eastern sky, but it's still dark enough that the markers should be visible. One craft slows, adjusts course. Then another. They're seeing the markers, following them. The first wave navigates into the channels, moving between the obstacles with careful precision. Clogstoun-Willmott feels something release in his chest. It's working. The improvisation, the 12-hour invention, the watchmaker's solution, it's actually working. More waves follow, dozens of landing craft, then hundreds. Not all of them navigate perfectly. Some coxswains miss markers, end up threading between obstacles by instinct and luck. A few craft strike hedgehogs, their hulls tearing, soldiers spilling into the water. But most follow the channels. Most make it through the obstacle field intact. On Omaha Beach, where German resistance is fiercest, the markers prove crucial. Machine gun fire rakes the approaching craft. Artillery shells explode in the surf. Soldiers are hit before they even reach shore. But the crafts themselves mostly survive the approach, guided through the obstacles, delivering their troops to the beach rather than sinking offshore where no one could be rescued. Clogstoun-Willmott watches wave after wave navigate the channels. He thinks about each marker, about the hours spent painting and waiting and testing, about his grandfather's patience, about precision in small things. Each of those glowing floats, no larger than a man's head, is saving lives right now. How many lives? Impossible to calculate. Dozens, certainly. Maybe hundreds. Maybe more. By 8 a.m., the sun is fully up. The markers are no longer glowing. They're stored in luminescence, exhausted. But by now, the first waves have already landed. The beaches are secured, relatively speaking. Follow-on waves can navigate by daylight, can see the obstacles clearly, can pick their way through without needing markers. The fast boat returns to Portsmouth at noon. Clogstoun-Willmott is soaked, exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and cold tea. On the dock, officers are gathering reports from returning vessels. I hear fragments of conversation. Heavy casualties on Omaha, lighter resistance on Utah, paratroopers scattered, naval bombardment effective in some sectors, insufficient in others. But I also hear coxswains talking about the markers, about how they found them even in the darkness, even with shells falling and machine guns firing, about how following those faint green lights gave them confidence to push forward, to trust their navigation, to get their soldiers onto the beach. One young coxswain, his uniform still damp from seawater, shakes Clogstoun-Willmott's hand. I don't know who put those markers out there, but they saved my boat, maybe saved my whole crew. Could barely see anything, but those lights were clear as church candles once I knew where to look. Clogstoun-Willmott nods, too tired to explain, too relieved to do more than accept the gratitude. He walks to his quarters, finally allows himself to sleep. The invasion continues without him. More waves land throughout the day. The beaches are consolidated. Allied forces push inland. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's vaunted defense, has been breached. And part of that breach, a small but crucial part, came down to a handful of copper floats coated with luminous paint, positioned with a watchmaker's precision in the darkness before dawn. In the months that follow, the markers are never officially recognized. They don't appear in battle reports or tactical analyses. The invasion's success is attributed to naval bombardment, air superiority, the courage of soldiers on the beaches. All true, all deserved, but the markers were there too, invisible in the historical record, just as they were invisible to the Germans, doing their small essential job while greater forces shaped the outcome. Clogstoun-Willmott never speaks much about them.
When asked, years later, about his role in D-Day, he mentions the reconnaissance work, the beach surveys, the intelligence gathering. The markers come up occasionally, usually prompted by someone who was there, some coxswain who remembers following faint green lights through impossible darkness. His grandfather's pocket watch stays with him for the rest of his life. He winds it every morning, watches the luminous hands glow softly when he checks the time at night, a reminder that the most important solutions don't always come from complexity or grand innovation. Sometimes they come from understanding how small things work, from improvising with what's available, from 12 hours of careful work with materials no more sophisticated than watch parts and paint. The watch still keeps perfect time. Precision in small things. That's what saves lives. That's what wins wars. Not always the grand gestures or the massive forces. Sometimes just a watchmaker's son working through the night, solving problems one careful adjustment at a time.